Tennessee is 2-0. Now squaring off against Florida this week in the Swamp, at the Swamp. And to come on and tell us more about the Florida Gators from Gators Online, Nick De La Torre. Nick, thanks so much for joining us, man. How's your weekend going?
Weekend's going well. Didn't have to cover another loss. I've covered a lot of those in my 11 years covering Florida. The mighty Cowboys of McNeese really put up a fight, but I think it's a win that Florida needed just to feel good about themselves. Had lost 4 in a row, so dealing with a happier fan base this weekend, and this is a rivalry week that I've always liked and looked forward to. So excited to talk more football. I think we just recapped the Utah loss all last week, and then Saturday showed up. And it's like, oh, there's a football game today.
Well, Nick, did you maybe learn anything more about Florida? I know it's a game you're supposed to win. Mm-hmm. Same with Tennessee and Austin Peay, and that was a little bit more interesting than what Tennessee fans would like. But did you kind of learn any more about Florida in week 2, or is it just one of those pad the stats, do feel better about yourself, and then kind of see where you are against Tennessee this week?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I covered a overtime game with Florida and FAU, so I've seen how ugly these winnable games can get. For me, though, it was Florida in the first game. Graham Mertz threw 44 times. That's not the formula to get the correct equation for wins in Gainesville. So I think Florida going back, listen, it's a defensive line that had one 300-pounder and probably a bunch of SEC linebackers playing defensive tackle and defensive end for McNeese. So, yeah, you can just play hat on a hat and run the ball, and I think that's what Florida needed to do. But they need to get some confidence. Florida had 6 procedural issues. I need them to see them play clean football against McNeese. They did that for the most part. Other than the offense fumbling late in their own, backed up in their own end, Florida was really going to pitch a shutout. I thought that was going to be good for the defense. The biggest thing I've seen for Florida, and it showed its head last year in Knoxville, was tackling. Florida couldn't get Hendon Hooker down. I think Jordan Travis is still running in Tallahassee against Florida. He looked like he was covered in Vaseline the way Florida was trying to tackle him. And it's so hard in the offseason. You guys are out at practice that you don't tackle anymore in practice. And you can roll those foam donuts for 12 hours a day. That's not the same as trying to tackle a 220-pound running back or a shifty receiver in space. So I think Florida has 9 missed tackles or 8 missed tackles through 2 games, which is probably a quarter of football. What they did last year. So that's been a thing for me when you look at new defensive coordinator Austin Armstrong coming in, is Florida's playing more sound technically on defense, and that's been a big thing for me through the first 2 games.
Nick, when you look at this defense, how important was week 2 just for the operation standpoint and not and it becoming second nature, not thinking so much out there? I know they gave it the big play to open the Utah game, but they kind of settled in pretty well in that game otherwise and gave themselves a chance. How important was it for them just to get another game under their belt in a new system?
Yeah, really important. Billy Napier all off season said, hey, it's not just year 2 for the players, it's year 2 for the coaches. Well, it's only game 2 for Austin Armstrong and the guys on that side of the ball. The interesting thing for me is Florida rotates so much on defense, and I think that's really been their strength. Last year, Gervon Dexter, who was a second-round pick, played 687 snaps. Florida just didn't have depth, and those big guys on the defensive line. Chris Rumpf told me one time, when they have one gas tank, and when their gas tank is empty, there's no refilling it at halftime or in the third quarter. When they're tired, they're tired. That's a big question I have this week. Josh Heupel's Formula One offense doesn't give you time to rotate guys in and out. So that'll be a big thing for me. Can Florida use its depth on defense, or will they have to have guys playing, 8 plays on a drive in a row, 9 plays in a row? So I think Florida's settled into Austin Armstrong's defense. It's not a ton different. One issue they've had is getting to the quarterback. No sacks on the road at Utah, only 2 against McNeese. McNeese didn't throw the ball a ton, but you would have expected to get more pressure on the quarterback against an overmatched opponent in McNeese.
The run game was such a struggle at Utah. Did they fix anything, or was it just a matter of who they were playing? I know I read in your 5 thoughts that almost 120 yards in the first quarter, on for kind of a record day in the run game. What did they find some things and really clean up some stuff, or was it just what you were saying earlier? They just overpowered a team that even if they had not prepared much in the run game, they could have lined up and done that against them.
It was an incredible job of fixing the schedule and fixing the opponent. I still have big concerns with Florida. No push, no lanes, no holes against Utah. And listen, Utah's got a very experienced and some big defensive linemen, a great front seven. I think we'll see that as the season plays out. But so does Tennessee, so does Georgia, so does LSU. You're going to face those. And I don't know that you can take much away from McNeese other than Florida finally got to feel good about itself. Hadn't been able to celebrate in the locker room. So maybe you build some confidence. If you had a 30-20 win against McNeese State, maybe you don't feel as good as you do right now if you're the Gators. I don't take a lot. There's not really anything I hang my hat on. No one on Florida's team and none of the Florida's coaches scheduled McNeese. But when you play teams that you're supposed to beat, you need to beat them the way you're supposed to beat them. So that's really all I can take away from the way Florida played McNeese.
Nick, we've talked about week 2 takeaways and talked about this defense kind of settling in with the new defensive coordinator. You look at this offense, we know all about the new quarterback and what he's trying to replace in Anthony Richardson. It feels like the run game you feel good about with your two options there with ETN and Johnson Jr. Behind Ricky Parcell Jr., there's not a whole lot of proven guys at the skill position. Who are some of these guys that are going to be coming along to kind of try to fill those voids?
Well, one that everyone's excited about is Eugene Wilson III. His dad played in the NFL. They call him Trey because he's the third. Listen, I'm not going to go full Urban Meyer here and call him the next Percy Harvin. But he's like a middle-class Percy Harvin. He lives in the suburbs. He has a nice SUV. He goes to Starbucks every day. This is a really exciting player. Where's number 3? Not a big guy, 5'10", maybe $180, but electric. He gets to his top-end speed really quickly. He's a guy. And I think when you look at the wide receiver room, you only had Pearsall coming back. Florida had a great freshman class with Andy Jean, Aiden Mizell, who's a track star, and then Wilson as well. So there's opportunity, and I think you're already seeing Trey Wilson got the start last week. He's really Florida, in my opinion, the only other guy that Florida can go to that you try to get speed and space, and he can make guys miss. So Florida's identity, make no mistake about it, is going to be to run the football. Graham Mertz is a fine quarterback. A game manager is a dirty word, but it probably shouldn't be. He's a game man. I mean, listen, there's some Alabama quarterbacks that were game managers that don't have enough room on their fingers for all the rings they have. So he's fine. He's not going to go out and win you games. I think the formula to beat Florida you saw against Utah. If you can stop the run and make Graham Mertz beat you, I don't know that Florida has the pieces around Graham for him to facilitate that. So I think the blueprint on beating Florida is out. You can thank Utah for that. But Florida's going to have to continue developing more guys. You can't just have, if the running backs are down, you can't win games with just Ricky Pearsall, Graham Mertz, and Eugene Wilson.
When you look at the big picture, you mentioned Billy Napier reminding everybody, hey, it's we're in year 2, we're still building this thing. We live in a world with zero patience. How big of a game is this, do you think, for Billy Napier with the fan base? And I'm not saying he's going to get fired. Okay. I'm not suggesting that or implying that, but just from a PR standpoint and kind of a popularity standpoint, how big of a game is this for Billy Napier early in year 2?
Well, I don't know that I want to live on our message boards if Florida doesn't get the win on Saturday. I called it, and I asked our message board, and I asked Florida fans, hey, am I off base on this? But I called it a must win, not in the sense that Billy's going to get fired or heads are going to roll if Tennessee wins in Gainesville on Saturday. But I view this as probably the easiest win of the rivalries, and Billy went over in the rivalries last year. FSU is a top 3 team in the country. Georgia's doing what Georgia does. You have to go to Death Valley to play LSU. When I look at Florida's schedule, I probably circle Tennessee and say, hey, this is probably the most winnable one. And if Florida goes for the first 2 years under Billy Napier in rivalry games, the hot seat is up next year, and Florida plays 11 of 12 Power 5 teams next year. The schedule is harder next year than it is even in this year. So I looked at this game and I thought, you're at home. You just had a pretty good crowd for McNeese. You're going to have a crazy crowd. You need to give Florida fans something to build on, something to hold on to. And I think we've likened what Billy Napier is doing is to like a house flipper. And you thought you bought a good house, and then you realized, no, we have to take it down to the foundation and start building the whole thing again. That's cool, but like I need to see a model home because we need to see what you're building. Construction's taking a little bit longer than we expected. So I think for Florida fans, a loss to Tennessee might be devastating, and you probably start wondering, okay, well, what is the timeline? When can we move in to this house we keep hearing is being built?
Hey, Nick, I got one more question for you. Up front, the offensive line. I know you had to replace at least 4 guys with starting experience. Might not have started all the time, but 4 guys with starting experience. Of course, a high draft pick, trying to replace Osiris Torrance, I believe is his name.
Osiris,
How's that offensive line kind of coming together? Or is it like Tennessee's at this point in the season, very much a work in progress?
Yeah, I think so. Austin, you can debate. Austin Barber kind of filled in for Michael Tarquin, who's now starting at USC, Southern Cal. I think the real USC is starting there. He got hurt at right tackle. Austin Barber, who's now playing left tackle, started a bunch of games at right tackle and then was in the mix even when Tarquin came back. He's been okay. Florida hasn't had Kingsley Aguakin, who was their starting center. He started 26 games before missing the Utah game and then missing last week against McNeese. And he's kind of, the quarterback of that offensive line, making calls, checks, the most veteran guy they have. I would expect him to be back. He had a high ankle sprain, but he's been nursing that for about 5 weeks. It'll be close to 6 weeks by the time they kick off on Saturday. Getting him back will be really good for Florida. And then I think Florida's been okay. Maybe we overhyped them a little bit in spring and fall. There's not many bad things to report when you're only talking to coaches and players in spring. Everyone looks like an All-American. But I think Florida's offensive line needs to be challenged. Like the bread and butter for Florida has to be running the football with Trevor Etienne, Montrell Johnson, and freshman running back from just up the road in Jacksonville. Trayon Webb looked really good. So Florida knows its identity. They got away from it because they got behind at Utah. And the new clock rules, I think their coaches are still going to be trying to figure out, hey, if we're down 10 in the fourth quarter, is the game over? Are we going to get enough possession? So I think Florida will get back to its identity, did against McNeese, and they need to try to do that Saturday against Tennessee. But the offensive line, I think getting Kingsley back would be big for them. And certainly from a leadership standpoint, and obviously he's a good player as well.
Nick, it's a big week. Tennessee and Florida down in the Swamp, a place where Tennessee hasn't won since 2003, and there's been some crazy finishes down there. What do you guys have coming up this week at Gators Online for Tennessee fans might want to check into?
Yeah, I think we're going to have you on our podcast, so we'll get you on. Listen, if nothing else, we'll get Eric on the show, and you can come look at him on our site. But yeah, it's a big week. I think it's important for both Florida and Tennessee to get wins here, and it would be huge for Tennessee. I mean, there's been some just Tennessee grabbing defeat from the jaws of victory in Gainesville. I know there's been some heartbreakers. In recent memory. So it's a huge week. We'll have a ton of content, history content from the Florida Tennessee rivalry. I grew up during the Spurrier and Fillmore years. That was probably the peak of it all. So yeah, we'll have a ton of content and film breakdown, stuff like that for you guys.
Nick, I appreciate it, man. Thanks so much, and enjoy the week.
Have a good one, guys.